Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining JFF, JFF Labs, and National Association of Workforce Boards webinar on the trends, realities, and emerging issues on workforce development. We are going to go get started. And so I do want to note that this session will be recorded. So if you are not able to stay for the entire webinar or want to share it with your colleagues that aren't able to make it today, we will be posting it on JFF's website, and as long as you're registered for this webinar, you will receive an email from us to let you know it is posted. Also posted will be the deck from today's discussion for your future reference. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And in the next hour, we're going to cover a fair amount of ground. Of course, I want to introduce you to our panelists and share a bit more about JFF and JFF Labs, as well as the Forum and National Association of Workforce Boards. We'll then dive into the meat of the discussion today on the trends, realities, and emerging issues, how we're navigating the change, how we're thinking about the growth and attention into certain areas of workforce development, also the shifting demands and emerging metrics for success, and then, of course, how we're seeing things develop potentially in the future. And then, of course, we'll close. Also, you will notice to the right of your screen there is a chat function. As you have questions or comments, please feel free to send questions to the group or privately. We'll do our best to answer all of them. And while we understand time is limited, the panelists have budgeted some extra time at the end. So if we don't get to all of the questions, we can stay over, and of course, this will be recorded. So before we get started, just want to give you a little context about JFF and JFF Labs. So last year, JFF launched our New Horizons vision with the overarching goals of leveraging JFF's 35 years legacy of deep programmatic and policy work across education and workforce systems to build an intentional bridge between the private sector, including corporations, mission-aligned startups, and other voices. And we do believe at JFF that connecting traditional systems with private sector leaders, innovative companies, and visionary entrepreneurs will catalyze the critical work of preparing today's workforce for the economy and jobs of tomorrow. That's, of course, why we're all here. And we intend to do this with speed and scale while driving coherence throughout the national debate. JFF Labs was formed to bridge JFF's traditional field leadership with new economy thinking, relationships, and innovative practices and business models. And you'll hear a little bit more about JFF Labs initiatives later today. So JFF Labs will bring new experiences and skill sets to the JFF team, allowing us to further our impact and mission. This experience includes entrepreneurship, building businesses, making investments, developing technology, and working with corporate partners to launch and integrate new solutions to support their workers and growth objectives. Of course, highly informed and in partnership with JFF and the systems that we know so well and believe in. So the partnership between JFF and JFF Labs does provide a unique platform for focused work designed to drive impact through multi-stakeholder engagement. And that's what we're going to talk about here today, and action around upskilling and inclusive talent development. So with that, I do want to introduce our panelists who are going to lead us through this conversation. My name is Emma Fisher, and I'm a founding programmatic lead team member for both JFF and JFF Labs, Center for Apprenticeship Work-Based Learning, and JFF Labs more broadly. Also here, a panelist, Eric Selznow, who many of you I'm sure know. He's a senior advisor here at JFF, and Eric oversees JFF's Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, which supports strategies that serves employers' business needs and help workers from all backgrounds access pathways to successful careers. Prior to JFF, he was Deputy Assistant Secretary at the United States Department of Labor and formerly served as a local workforce board director in Montgomery County and as a state workforce board director in Maryland. Also with us is Josh Kopis, who, again, another familiar face. Josh joined JFF Labs as an entrepreneur in residence in May 2018 to focus on documenting how workforce systems are evolving and to develop a clearer understanding of how technology, data systems, and new service delivery models were being implemented across the country. Josh was previously the Chief Operating Officer at NAWB and has used that expertise and perspective to build a fresh base of evidence for how workforce boards and American Job Centers are preparing for the future. Kelly Middleton Banks, our Commander-in-Chief for the rest of this webinar, is the Manager of Program Implementation at the National Association of Workforce Boards. Kelly oversees NAWB's workforce initiatives such as family-centered employment, advancing retail engagement, and NAWB's industry partner programs to support workforce development boards in implementing strategies and best practices to expand workforce services to businesses and job seekers. Prior to NAWB, Kelly spent 12 years managing programs in higher education and medical education design to support disadvantaged and marginalized populations. So with that, I do want to hand it off to Kelly, who is going to set up the rest of the discussion and also introduce the forum, which is just happening later this month, pending deadline.
Thank you so much, Emma, and good afternoon, everyone. As Emma stated, I'm Kelly Middleton Banks. I'm really happy to be with you all this afternoon. As what you're seeing in front of you right now, the forum is happening at the end of this month. We are excited. We are thrilled to be welcoming 1,400 of our best friends and family to come with us and learn more about the current trends in workforce development. As you all know, and those who may not be familiar with the forum, again, is at the end of this month, and it just gives everyone who's attending an opportunity from workforce development boards, businesses, government officials, and industry, a chance to come together and learn more into the deep challenges that impact workforce development. It's also an opportunity for participants to engage in their personal networks, build their networks, build valuable relationships, and as, of course, share data, best practices, and successful program models. So that the forum, as you all are hoping to experience, will be a great opportunity for you to engage with one another. And some of those items as are presented in front of you on this slide. You can move to the next slide. So as I want to talk a little bit about National Association of Workforce Boards, and I'm going to quickly turn it over to my colleagues, Eric and Josh. The National Association of Workforce Boards advocates for workforce development boards and represents the 550 workforce development boards across the country. And in addition to that, NAWB has continuously been on the front line of advancing workforce development from a policy and business perspective. But before I go any more into NAWB, I'd love to hear a little bit about Eric and JFF's work on the 35 years that you all have been here working towards workforce development. Eric, could you give us a little insight on JFF's work in action?
I'd be delighted to. Good afternoon. Thank you, Kelly. Good afternoon, everybody out there in webinar land. Thanks for making the time to join us today. It's a pleasure always a pleasure to be a partner with NAWB on these things as we get ready for, gosh, it's probably my 18th forum in a row. Yes, Emma, I am old. That is true. And so thanks for making the time to be here today. You know, JFF's been around a long time at the intersection of education and training and employment. We work with many boards across the country and colleges and community-based organizations and state boards and state department labors and a whole range of folks in the workforce system that all of us know. So we've been in that space for 35 years. And what's really been interesting the last year or so, and since I've been here at JFF for about 2 years, done a number of very cool things is, you know, you talk about the future of work and, you know, Kelly, we're also talking about, you know, how organizations change both in the workforce system, workforce boards, but also organizations like JFF. And JFF has leaned very strongly into the future of work, has leaned into some new areas like our Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning that I'll talk about a little bit, our JFFLabs, the innovation arm of JFF, our focus on education technology, which is becoming very much more important across the country, and then a range of our other partners. So, you know, we're out there in the field. JFF, you know, certainly I didn't know before I came here, is a much larger organization than I thought. We have about 150 people across the country working on these issues, and we work with like I said, a lot of constituents probably on the line and across the country. So we're changing too and leaning and looking towards the future. I would love to talk about apprenticeship and work-based learning for the entire session, but I won't do that. I'll have a couple of sessions at the forum where we can talk more about that, or folks can come by our JFF table and we can talk about that. But, you know, things are changing out there in the workforce system. Different sort of funds are coming into workforce agencies. Different sort of strategies are being looked at, you know, sector work, career pathways. You know, people are still trying to figure out what they can do with WIOA and some of the new rules and laws coming out of DOL. So there's a lot of different things going on. But apprenticeship and work-based learning, and look, I ran a local board, I ran a state board. We looked at that, we considered it. Back in the day, it was just another siloed program. But today, I think we're looking at, you know, real-world work experiences for people. It's a tightening labor market. Employers still complain that they're not getting the workers they need with the skills they have. So we believe in applied learning and real-life work-based learning, whether it's for youth or adults. We think apprenticeship is a great way to do that. But there are other forms of work-based learning as well. And I think in this country, we're at really the early stage of a transformation in our apprenticeship system across the country. We've been doing it for 5 years. I led that work at Labor. The Obama administration put a lot of money into it. The Trump administration is continuing some of that work on apprenticeship. I think it's here to stay, but we're still at the early stages. And colleges are trying to figure out how to do apprenticeships. Employers are, workforce boards are. And so we hope other folks, you know, are open to new ideas and thinking about how we can leverage real work-based learning with related technical instruction to get people the credentials they need to advance in the workplace. So I could go on forever, Kelly. I won't do that. But that's some of the new things we're working on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. You brought up some really important points about the value of partnership and collaboration and the changes that are occurring. As the National Association of Workforce Boards sits at this table, you know, we recognize that this is not a one-man show in a way in which we can approach and help workforce development boards get ready for the future of work. And that's what brings us today together. That's what brings us to this webinar. And one of the things we also recognize is the fact that technology and data are key to the success of the public workforce development system. And that's why it's so prevalent and so critical that we partner together to move forward with Awake. And would love to hear a little bit from Josh about how we got here and how is this launch of Awake impacts workforce development.
Sure, happy to do so. And I will say I'm actually starting to creep up on you, Eric, in terms of years served at the forum. I think this will be my 10th forum.
Oh, wow.
You know, so, you know, and you know, and these kinds of benchmarks too. I mean, 10 years. You know, I've spent a lot of time over the course of the last year reflecting on, you know, all the things that I learned as, you know, as an employee of the National Association of Workforce Boards, traveling the country just like Eric, meeting with workforce board directors, spending a lot of time in the front lines in American job centers, and how much I have seen, you know, changing in terms of how workforce boards and how the public workforce system is trying to reorient to meet the demands of the, you know, the future. What I think Awake really is more than anything is a common bond between JFF and NAWB, realizing that if we're going to do our part in terms of advocating for the workforce board, workforce boards connecting workforce boards to new and emerging opportunities, and also cultivating the right set of tools and technologies that can help workforce boards navigate a more complicated future, we needed to know more about what the realities were of how workforce boards were evolving. And to be perfectly honest, I got to a point after 10 years working in DC where I was pretty convinced that I wasn't going to learn about what the future of work looked like by reading another report. What I was increasingly convinced of was that the way I was going to understand and the way we were going to work to help prepare more people for the jobs of today and tomorrow were by talking to folks within the workforce system. I saw that, you know, that evolution that Eric talked about, more workforce boards becoming entrepreneurial, creating new ways of raising funds to provide for the kinds of services and needs that the people they work with were coming to them looking for. And we set out to really deeply investigate the changing trends within the workforce system. So I will say, what Eric and I are going to tackle are a lot of really complicated issues. Those issues brush up against issues related to technology, related to new training modalities. There's questions around how workforce boards are increasingly responsible for a breadth of programs that extend far beyond WIOA. And those open up some pretty large questions around the data and information that we're collecting both locally at a state level and at a federal level to understand the true impact of this system that we often talk about as the public workforce system. And this is all rooted in a pretty deep set of structured interviews and conversations with 35 executive directors, CEOs, and COOs across the workforce system, and represent around 30 workforce boards and how they are experiencing the trends of today and tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh, for giving us some insight on Awake and the work that you've done thus far. I'd be interested in knowing what general trends have you seen so far in some of the work that you've been doing with Awake and through the interviews and different data points that you've probably had access to.
Sure. So I think one of the most interesting things for me that kind of it did catch me by surprise in some of the conversations that I entered into is that this started for me very much as an opportunity to try and document and understand the current state of technology and data systems within the workforce system. And I think that what has emerged through a lot of the work and a lot of the conversations that I've had is that while there are a number of new technologies and new approaches coming online that workforce boards are starting to consider in terms of how they serve a broader set of workers, in terms of how they provide more programmatic impact beyond WIOA. What's interesting to me is that I'm actually seeing a new set of behaviors that are emerging from the really innovative local leaders that really indicate that workforce boards are being much more entrepreneurial in the way that they think about their position within the community. In every one of the conversations that I had, there was a growing awareness that the public funding through the WIOA system actually wasn't going to be adequate in and of its own to really meet the demands both of businesses and learners and workers that these organizations were trying to serve. And I think that it's those market pressures that have really encouraged workforce boards to adopt more user-centered practices, to really try and understand how to use new tools, new technologies to connect with workers in ways that we might not have been able to imagine even 10 or 20 years ago. So for me, I think that I want to spend a little bit of time with Eric talking about how we've actually seen some of those behaviors and those viewpoints evolve, and we can dig in a little bit more into those questions around technology and data as we progress.
Okay, well, we'll let you dig into the technology and data. I'll talk about the progress. That's the thing that always vexed me in the workforce system was all the different performance, data, technologies, vendors, just a big, messy space of that. Certainly when I first got into the system, 20 years ago, and still out there today. But technology is having a huge effect not only on the program and delivery of services to people and delivering education and training services, but also in the collection of information and the analysis of that information. And I know, Josh, it's a particular interest of yours, not a huge interest of mine, although it is important, right? And, I'm interested in, how these things impact workforce system in general, but WIOA, or the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, if you're unfamiliar with that wonderful acronym, how they interact with those programs generally. And so technology has a huge influence. We talked about trends a little bit, and to know trends, certainly to our audience, you're going to see the trends at NAWB, right? At that conference, you're going to see, everything from vendors and experts and specialists and sessions. And there's going to be things I never thought about as you see new trends going on in this space. How you manage boards, how you adopt technology, how it impacts people with disabilities, how it impacts out-of-school youth, how it impacts apprenticeship and work-based learning programs. So there's a lot going on, certainly there. I know that, the holy grail of a lot of this work is showing your impact, measuring your impact, and so any tool, any technology, any support one gets to demonstrating that, either to your county commissioners, to your mayor, to your state, to the feds, or to your funders is really important. And so I think, some of the important work that Josh is doing through this really new initiative, Awake. So a lot of you say, well, I don't know anything about Awake. Well, it's new, right? It's happening, so we have to get awake to get awake. But it's really looking at some of these deeper issues on data collection and data analysis and showing impact. And again, that's a hard thing for our system because people misunderstand it. I don't know about you all, but I would go in front of policymakers and legislators and they'd say, oh, I see you're only spending, less than half of your money on training. So you mean the other half of your money is going to admin? Well, people don't understand how our system works. When I have 15,000 people walking in my front door every year looking for a range of services, not just training, right? So how do you show that? How do you show the demographics of the population you serve, the impact that they're having, the impact on employers, the impact on improving our customers and our clients' lives? And so a lot of challenges out there. And Josh, I'm glad you're in that space because it really gets daunting when you think about all the things you want to show impact for, right? And I know as a practitioner, like I'm a program guy, I was out there trying to make relationships and partners, but you had to enter that, people, I know many of you on the line hate to hear this, but you got to enter your data. You got to put it into, whatever system you're using. You need to have people who can do the analytics. You want to spend money on training and helping your clients, but you also have to spend some time and attention to this. So another reason why diversified funding coming into your system is good. But so anyway, I could talk about this for a long time, but it's just really important to show that impact and to find the updated tools. We rely on folks like Josh and the world you're in really to find tools that make it easier for us to do.
Well, and I think one thing, Ari, you hit on here that's like, and it's actually a really important conversation for us to have is you think more about, apprenticeship and the training component of WIOA, or the training component of what workforce boards do, is that I think that what often happens in our space is that, the workforce system is so often seen as just an extension of the job training dollar. And what we're trying to do really through this initiative is really call more attention to all of the work that workforce boards are doing that extend well beyond those training investments that are made through WIOA, and are actually kind of a composite total of these other kinds of activities that Eric talks about in terms of how are we serving people that walk through the jobs of a career center, how are we actually counting for the self-service. There's an increasing amount of job seekers and learners and workers that we're really serving through the internet. They're not even walking through the American Job Center anymore. And we need to really focus on trying to tell that story of how the workforce system is driving some of that new kind of participation and are putting resources online, are putting resources on new kinds of platforms, are the ones who are responsible for curating new e-learning and really new learning opportunities for people that might not necessarily occur within the context of a one-stop, might not occur even live face-to-face. Some of those are actually virtual platforms where we're now connecting students with mentors and teachers across time and space, and that's not actually happening in the one-stop that we would have typically imagined 10 years ago.
You bring up, both of you, very valid points about how the shift from WIA to WIOA has impacted what the Workforce Development Board and the public workforce system has now been faced to try to meet and change and shift to meet those changes. And I appreciate both of your insights because you all both have been on the ground and working very intimately, not only with the changes with WIOA, but the actual workforce development boards and staff. I know that we're working through this slide presentation, and just to revisit back to some of the topics we're covering right now, the navigating the change, preparing for future work, which we've been discussing thus far, and now we're going to be moving into some of the growth and tension around apprenticeship and work-based learning to continue this conversation to make sure that we meet our time allotted. But I'd love to hear some more about, and Eric, you've started off with some of what you've been seeing around workforce learning and apprenticeship, and we know this, the public workforce system, workforce development boards, this is not new to them. This has been their work. They've been working through this. There's been new energy around it, some from the current administration. There's new energy around it from different industries. I know the National Association of Landscaping Professionals just put out a new apprenticeship program. AHLA, which is Hotel and Lodging, and the National Restaurant, they've also put forth apprenticeship programs. So, and those are also partners of the National Association of Workforce Boards through our Industry Partners program. So we're encouraged. We're very encouraged to see that this is happening, encouraged to see that there's energy there. But we'd love to hear from you a little bit more about what you're seeing in work-based learning, and also what are you seeing as far as new training modalities that may be out there. How are they being applied out in the midst of the workforce system?
Yeah, well, I think people who are viewing this webinar are probably better equipped to do that than I am because they're probably out in the field a lot more than I am. But yeah, I mean, and not to short the conversation on technology and data because I think this all comes together at some point. But apprenticeship is not the answer for every workforce problem out there, right? It is a solution in certain instances, right? And certainly many of the folks on the phone are doing, or on the webinar are doing sector strategies. We're working with groups of businesses. They're doing career pathways initiatives. They're doing sort of, longer-term career pathways with non-English speakers, getting them on a pathway to skills and credentials. So there's a lot of different types of work going on out there. Apprenticeship is not the answer for every workforce problem, although I wish it was. It's not. But when it intersects with sectors or career pathways, it becomes very important. And we see lots of experiments going on out there. And in some places across the country, workforce boards are leading the way. In other parts of the country, workforce boards are just partners, and that's totally fine. When I was a workforce board director, I thought I had to run everything in my county. I was a workforce guy. We were in charge of everything. And I really learned through my partnerships, which many of these folks have too, is that I didn't need to lead anything. I had some really good partners I had confidence in who could take on, special populations or special projects or even be vendors or contractors to us who could do a much better job. So, still the important part, just to tie it back to data, was collecting the information on the outputs and outcomes of those programs, which is really important. But, we see innovation in apprenticeship and, work-based learning is a continuum, right? So you have on one side very high standard, high quality standards and rigor with registered apprenticeships. Nowadays you're seeing more non-registered apprenticeships. You're seeing more co-op programs in colleges, more work-based learning in colleges, more internship and even now apprenticeship programs in high school, really high quality, high rigor apprenticeship programs in high schools. Questions I often get are, well, does the WIB where's the local workforce board participate in this? Some places they do quite strongly, some places they don't. So, there's a lot of innovation around there. I would encourage anybody who's part of that work-based learning ecosystem in their community to get engaged. It's going to be a different leader in different parts. Sometimes it's going to be traditional occupation. Sometimes it's going to be IT. Sometimes the college will be leading it. Sometimes the trade association or another intermediary will be leading it, but oftentimes a workforce board doesn't quite understand how much they have to contribute to that.
Eric, we have a good question about a big challenge, but with apprenticeships, is that it's extremely tough for small businesses to sustain that type of infrastructure. And so it'd be nice to hear if you talk a little bit about the role of apprenticeship with small businesses or associations.
Sure. Well, yep, sure. I mean, the interesting, that's a great question, by the way, and the interesting part about that is heretofore, when I first started working with apprenticeships back in 2001 and 2002, it was mostly small and medium-sized businesses that were doing it. Yes, the construction and the trades and some of the larger unions were doing it. There was Joe's Tool and Die Shop down the street. It was a small manufacturing company, the truck driving company. So, you know, to me, there were a lot of small companies doing it. And, you know, apprenticeship gets a bad rap, you know, oftentimes that, oh, it's so daunting, it's so bureaucratic, it's so terrible to do. It really isn't. In some cases it can be, I guess, depending upon where you are in the country, like anything, but it's not. And one of the, you know, the great part about the question is you talked about, you know, especially in the workforce system, how do we do that with small businesses? And like a lot of things we've done in the workforce system, it's a matter of how do you bring people together for scale. So sector strategy work, industry partnership work, where you bring in 20 or 30 manufacturers, 10 or 12 hotels in your region, 4 or 5 hospitals. I know many of you out there are doing that work right now. So when you bring those groups together of industry sectors, apprenticeship can be part of that. You see examples across the country where there's large anchor institutions. I think of Siemens in North Carolina, where they brought in their entire supply chain to do apprenticeship work, including other medium and small businesses. You see a sector approach where you bring 10 or 20 manufacturers together, and each one of them send a couple of people for an apprenticeship or included in that. So, you know, if you can aggregate the demand and bring together many companies or even a handful of companies to do apprenticeship, it works better for everybody. But one of the most effective ways to doing that is finding an intermediary who can do the heavy lifting for that small and medium-sized business. And intermediaries, we have a whole webinar on that in JFF's website, so I would direct you to that because I don't have enough time to go into that now, or Emma will kick me under the table. But having an intermediary, a board, a college, a nonprofit community-based organization with expertise in apprenticeship can often reduce the heavy lifting for small businesses. So happy to circle back on that with whoever asked that question.
Thank you so much, Eric. And for those that are on the phone, Eric is so knowledgeable, and his expertise around work-based learning and apprenticeship is invaluable. So definitely connect with him to learn more about what is occurring out in the field and how that is being impacted by the future of work. When we're thinking about measuring impact and outcomes, I want to turn to Josh a little bit to talk a little bit more about Awake and how that's playing into some of what we're seeing, what we may potentially see in the future, you know, how we're working through the data points that are currently available. Just really elaborate a little bit more on Awake and its role in that.
Sure. So I want to say that, like, there's, and Eric keeps kind of saying, well, the data and technology things, like, that's a technical set of issues that's really complicated. And I think, I mean, he's absolutely right. A major part of what I'm really trying to zero in on here with this question of measurement and this question of outcomes isn't necessarily a question about what data systems are we using to collect that information, although I will say it's an important opportunity and it's an important challenge that I identified across all of the conversations I had, is that as workforce boards grow and as they grow to extend their mandate well beyond WIOA, they are also creating many, many different systems that are responsible for collecting and managing that data and information. And those workflows have become quite complicated to the point where you will have one workforce board potentially managing 30 different programs and funding streams, and will have a data collection system for each one of those programs and funding streams. So when you hear people talk about integrated data systems, interoperability, those are some of the technical things that we're trying to solve for, is actually how do we start to connect the systems in the same way that WIOA programmatically, you know, encourages more collaboration across multiple titles. There's an equal amount of interest now that we've started to make some major progress in terms of programmatic alignment and figuring out how to get the right people and the right programs to the table to talk about what are the problems and how do we tackle those together. Now the big question is, do we actually have systems? Do we have technology? Do we have the kind of tools in place that allows us to manage that workflow, that allows us to manage those people?
It gets really challenged. I mean, I'm thinking back to my days on a state board and a local board. It gets really challenging, right? So let me just use apprenticeship as an example, right? Okay, so
Apprenticeship's a perfect example.
I have an apprentice. Okay, and they're WIO eligible, Workforce Innovation Act eligible participant. So they go in that database. They're going into a registered apprenticeship program, so they have to go in the RAPIDS database there. It may be another funder that requires some other reporting. So I think your point about, I can't remember what your exact quote was, but managing those collection systems is important. And that's something that's really hard. You're trying to run a workforce system or run a program, and to be thinking about managing those systems. Any suggestions or any insights?
Well, I think that's what's so so critical is that those systems in many ways, and I heard this in the research, is there really is a cry for more digital infrastructure. I think people are finally starting to hear and understand the importance of collaboration. I mean, Eric, you mentioned all of the different partners that you need to bring to the table to have this conversation around apprenticeship, around work-based learning, around how do we actually think about training and preparing people in our community, in these times, and the number of people and the amount of kind of input and output that those organizations are required to contribute to that single goal, that's really hard to manage. And I think as we see new systems coming online that help us manage workflow across one organization, but even now across multiple organizations. I mean, Eric, I know this is why you guys are working with JFFLabs to have launched the Work-Based Learning Accelerator Program, was to try and identify some potential technology partners that were in this space and could create some more opportunities for people to manage that work both on the back end and in the front end of creating better experiences for people, as well as empowering folks that work within the system to have the kinds of tools and information they need to make smart decisions. So I think what I will say about my fixation recently on data hasn't just been about the technical aspects of what's the technology and what's the importance of tracking those data points. It's actually about how much I see the philosophy around what we're doing as workforce boards evolving to extend so far beyond what we have commonly talked about within the range of WIOA and within the range of the programmatic outcomes that workforce boards are pursuing through that legislation. In my conversations with a lot of leading-edge workforce boards, they're asking a lot of questions about community impact. It's not just about the impact that they're having through the programs that they're federally funded to deploy, but it's actually questions about, as a workforce board, can we have an impact on high school dropout rates? Can we have an impact on recidivism rates? Can we think about living wage? Can we think about how to improve labor market participation? So I think that when you hear people talk about data and the importance of data, it's actually an importance around tracking the outcomes and the aggregate impact that workforce systems have on their community. And we recognize that we continuously need to identify better systems to help us do that.
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately to be able to communicate that, because we can collect all the data that we want, but if we're unable to communicate that to our community, to the Hill, to local government, it just makes it even more challenging for the workforce development boards to continue to have a stake in their community to provide those services. And I think the technology pieces that you've brought up, Josh, as you've mentioned, Eric, the value that's there for increased technology platforms is critical for them to be able to not only utilize that information to inform their decisions, but to be able to communicate that. So, I really appreciate the fact that JFF and NAWB and JFFLabs recognized that it was important to come together to create an opportunity to get a better insight on what's happening out in the field, so we could possibly be able to inform others about what's available. So thank you for that, Josh. In addition to the measuring the impact and outcomes, how does this impact the future? What's the roadmap? What does this look like as we move forward? Are we moving forward to creating all new data platforms? Are we moving forward to identifying different data points? Are we, walking down the aisle singing Kumbaya to make this happen? What does partnership look like? What does collaboration look like? as we move down the road.
Let me talk about that just on the local level for a minute.
No, I think that's good.
I mean, it sort of goes back to your other point, Josh. And I just remember doing that work locally, and at the state level too, and at all of the level. Our workforce development system has tentacles that reach everywhere. So somebody may be doing a reentry program in a partnership with a county jail. You may be doing a foster care employment program with an out-of-school youth cohort. You may have a major employer come into town who wants you to do recruitment with them. You have, every Wednesday you have this employer coming in to do recruitments. And there's so many different pieces of your work, and it's hard to capture it all under one. Gee, is there one data umbrella for it, or can I just capture it here? And so there's a lot of moving parts to our system, and it's all great work. It's important work, and we have veterans who do, veterans representatives who do their work in a one-stop. You might have a disability program. You might have a major layoff again. So there's all of these different things going on. So where's the sameness and the discipline then from how you collect that information? Or is that what you're trying to get to? But there's challenges in our system for that, which is why for the last 20 years this conversation's been going on.
Well, I also think what's interesting that, for us to consider, while this conversation is one that isn't necessarily new, we also have at our disposal a lot more tools and technologies that can actually make these things possible in a way that I think, weren't maybe possible in the past. So I will say, Kelly just threw a lot of big questions at us in terms of where all this is, going, and ultimately what this will amount to. I think what I will say is that Eric said awake is new, right? Awake is just awakening. And I think, part of what we're figuring out right now is how to leverage some of the assets that were collected across all of this research. In the course of this research, we've more clearly defined what technology is within the workforce system. We've understood how various tools and products are being applied to solve for some of the challenges that Eric and I have discussed today. We've documented almost 100 different specific tools and products that local workforce boards have already adopted to try and respond to these issues around managing workflow, around collecting data and information in more efficient, more effective ways, in terms of how workforce boards are trying to think about training in new ways, and how they're, and again, I'll reference some of the work that's being done at JFFLabs for the accelerator. We have NEPRIS is developing a product that helps people within industries connect directly with learners over the web. It's a great opportunity to build on something that we know works and using a new technology to reach more people and reach people easier than we would have been able to in the past. I think we have the same kind of examples that we're seeing, through innovative creative uses of, things that might not have necessarily been developed for our industry. In one of the conversations I had, there was a local workforce board that had actually adapted a table-ready product that restaurants would use to manage reservations. They had adapted that to manage their reservations essentially in the one-stop. So there's kind of a simple tool that's being applied in a really innovative way. And I think that through Awake and through the work of JFFLabs and this partnership with NAWV, it's our intention to identify, more examples of where innovative workforce leaders are kind of thinking about their impact as an organization beyond WIOA, asking those big questions about how can they move major needles within their community that are related to jobs, employment, and economic opportunity. And then what is the role of technology in terms of being able to help accelerate or expand that impact? And finally, what are the systems that we're going to use to actually track the impact that we're having and build upon that? Because I think that we have a really interesting opportunity here as workforce boards and as American Job Centers to really lead the way in this whole thing called future of work. Because what I am increasingly convinced of, and what was proven to me in my conversations, are that workforce boards are in the middle of these conversations. And they are being looked at to curate tools. They're being looked at to build data systems that, that help communities understand, how and where there are opportunities to build human capital and to attract new businesses. And I think that, through this work of Awake, it's really going to be on us, and I think on you guys, on folks in the field, to reach out to us and share those successes, open up more conversations about the tools and technologies that you're using or that you're hoping to use, and frankly rely on us, rely on JFFLabs, and NAWB, to help record and organize some of what we're seeing is working. And I think that, that our hope too is that we see more workforce leaders demonstrate an appetite for new approaches and are willing to work with us, particularly as we explore partnerships with entrepreneurs and technology companies to try new things and really together figure out how we continue to elevate the work that we all do throughout the country.
Right. It's funny, Josh, talking about the future of work. I'm old enough to remember, as many people on the phone probably are, used to do your job orders by floppy. Well, first it was a bulletin board where job orders would go, and then it was floppy disks, and now, of course, everything is online. Used to be, and still is in many places, bus vouchers and transportation tickets to help job seekers get around. Now I've heard of places who use Uber vouchers now to get people moving around. There's incredible case management tools that we never had, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Virtual reality and artificial intelligence is being, and adaptive technology is being used in a range of the products we use every day. We don't really know it. English language learners, there's some incredible products on the market for English language learners now that we never thought of before, right? So there's a lot of interesting things that happening that make our job easier. I mean, one other I wanted to mention, and I used to work in the jail system for many years, and now there's laptops with learning information loaded in them that inmates can take back to cell areas to actually, work on while they're there. So all sorts of innovations and new technologies and new impacts going on. So it'll be happening with our programs. It'll be happening with how we manage our programs. So I think those are really, interesting things to think about as we think about the future of our work. I also know in NAWB a lot of these things are going to be highlighted there. So you're doing a couple of sessions. Oh, yeah. On this, Josh, you are. I know there's a boatload of apprenticeship sessions going on and some other things.
Yeah. So there's one thing. I know we got some questions rolling in. I want to reflect on what Eric just said, because I think it's kind of this delicate dance that we all have to be doing in terms of how we really confront the realities of today, while being so cognizant of some of the new opportunities of tomorrow. I mean, Eric referenced, the floppy disk. There's, in some of my conversations, there's one-stops, there's one-stops out there that keep one computer in each one of their one-stops with a floppy disk drive, because it's that often that they have a job seeker walk through the door and hold up a floppy disk and say, my resume's on here. So I think that, and that's a really important thing that I think that the JFF and NAWB are positioned to be aware of, is the fact that there are some very serious issues we have around just preparing people to be digitally literate, and frankly, even preparing workforce professionals to leverage new tools and adapt to, to new technologies on the job. I think that's part of the work, but it's also mixed with recognizing that things like virtual reality and things like augmented reality may actually, sooner rather than later, have a place in this conversation around how do we train people for jobs. That may be done on a virtual reality headset. That's not happening today, but it's going to happen tomorrow. And I think workforce boards are very well positioned to be a place where those kinds of things can be tested and can happen, but there's a lot of work we need to do to prepare for that.
So Josh, we have a lot of questions coming on, and it sounds like broadly you're talking about folks should engage and attend some sessions and maybe email you, I think it's but there's a number of questions about how to really engage in this work in a tangible way as well, and I just want a few questions. Is there potential funding available to support emerging strategies and innovations, some of those partnerships that you were talking about, and how might those connections and strategies be developed in work? Also, will Awake and JFF Labs provide a repository of resources for workforce boards that are accessible online? Maybe that's something like the library of tools and resources that I hope everybody's had a chance to look through related to apprenticeship and work-based learning. And then finally, thinking beyond WIOA is great, but what do we do with compliance monitors and state agencies? Many say that they want innovation but have trouble understanding what programs try to experiment with new practices. So how can we incentivize state agencies to better embrace some of that risk, because some of these new tools are a little bit risky, and feel like they won't be punished, quote unquote, by USDOL or something for experimenting and do that innovation that you guys are talking about here?
All right, Eric, do you want to tackle some of the compliance questions? Well, and then I don't want to forget about the question.
No, look, I don't work for the government anymore. So, number one.
Well, but this isn't just about the.
No, I know it's not. Look, our system, our public workforce system has legacy systems and incredible technology challenges in federal level and state UI systems. At the local level, I think some of the question is not whether you take a risk and are punished by a state or the feds or a program monitor or something like that. I think some of it has to do with cost, right, as well, right? What's going to be affordable? What can you afford in your local area, your state to bring on to augment your work there? You're still going to have to work with your state partners and your federal partners on that. So I think some of it is looking at what the costs of some of these products are, how well these products know your system, and can accommodate some of their approaches and their strategies to the work that you have to do. I know sometimes when I worked with vendors, they would come in and spend a lot of time with us getting to know us before they gave us a product. So I don't know. I think those are all things to look at. Keep your partners in the loop, of course. And I think cost is going to be an issue as local areas think about, well, if I spend $200,000 on this system, I got to take $200,000 out of training.
Yeah. And I think and the cost and the funding is also, that's also part and parcel with how to have that tolerance for more risk. I mean, in a lot of the conversations that I had, we all know that WIOA isn't necessarily very flexible in terms of what it can be used for. So I think that, to that question of will there be funding available for more workforce boards to have the kinds of flexible assets they need to experiment with some of these new tools, I think the answer is yes. I think that, that's a huge part of what JFFLabs, frankly, is trying to focus on right now, is how to build more support and more capacity for traditional systems to link up with new economy players to really pilot and test these new tools and technologies. And I'm sure going to do my God's honest best to make sure that, that workforce boards are continuously understood to be a major national asset. We have 2,500 American Job Centers across the country. That's more than we have Home Depots. That's more than we have Chick-fil-A's. That's more than we have Bed Bath & Beyond's. So, for funders out there who are kind of asking this question of how do we get to scale, where are these opportunities to pilot new tools and technologies, to understand what the impact might be, I'll tell you right now, we got 550 organizations that have been managing this kind of work for many decades, and we have 2,500 career centers that touch somewhere between 15 and 20 million people every year. So I think that the answer to that is yes. I think I will say that we need more help identifying who is out there that wants to participate in a conversation about change, that wants to ask questions about, where do I find new tools and how can I adapt new technologies. If we get a critical mass of workforce boards that come to the table to contact us and tell us that we want to have more formal conversations to explore these things, I have a sneaking suspicion that we can count on more funding to support some of these efforts over the long term. I also do want to mention the question of the repository. So I actually have been working on behalf of JFFLabs and on behalf of the Awake Partnership on building a repository for adult learning organizations and workforce development boards to understand how to access certain tools and technologies. That will be coming online shortly before the forum, and I will actually be at the event with my colleagues from JFF and some other supporting organizations to actually unveil workforceedtech.org, which is a 1.0 version of a repository that will help more organizations within the workforce development and adult learning space start to access new tools, new technologies, and understand what those applications might be.
Awesome. And thank you for that, Josh. And I appreciate you talking a little bit about the funding piece, because I do think that workforce development boards right now are of great interest to a lot of different funding mechanisms out there. There's definitely a great interest in ensuring that there's access to what's happening on the ground in these local communities around workforce development and meeting future demand. So thanks for touching on that and how to engage with AWAIT and how to consider some of these items on a local level. We're going to start to move to wrapping some of these conversations up. I'd definitely like to give each one of you a minute to at least give some final thoughts around this conversation. I know both of you will be a knob. I know both of you have a great involvement in some of the sessions and workshops that will be happening there. So I know that participants will have a chance to meet you there, participating in those sessions. But if you wouldn't mind, just give a few seconds of final thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, no, there'll be a lot of our partners and friends and colleagues from across the country there, and a ton of great workshops on a lot of subjects there. I think one of the things is, particularly in our contemporary workforce or our contemporary economy, right? We have a tightening labor market, and I still think our work is more important than ever, even in this tight labor market where unemployment is low and many parts of the country the lowest it's been in years. Employers still require people with skills and the ability to move up, and it's not just about getting a job, it's about getting a good job and a good wage, and so there's some equity issues out there. We have a lot of need out there, even with these low unemployment rates. I mean, you used to say, oh, you could fall off a truck and get a job. That's right, but can you get a good job? Can you advance? Can you move up? And I think now is the time for our system to make those, to really shine when the labor market is tight, make those relationships, make those partnerships, because when things turn south again, and they will, those of us who've been around a while know that we have some of the partners and relationships in which to build on all these things we've talked about today, but also to get those community-based relationships really going and solid. And the tight labor market's a good time to do that. So I think I'm supposed to give a plug for our website at jff.org. And also we have you can 2 clicks away from any of our material, our work-based learning cohort, our Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, our event section, and then something I can't read here.
If folks want to find out more about JFF at NAWB's forum, please do visit our events page, and we'll list all of our programs and the ways you can engage with Josh and Eric and our policy team there.
Josh?
I mean, Eric just made a lot of really great points there, and I think that in a nutshell, as I think about the totality of the work that I did through Awake and trying to understand, what are some of the trends, and it's really become a question of preparedness. And I think that Eric very much alluded to that, is that, as we think about how much more complex it's going to be for the average learner or worker to navigate some of these systems and think about how to get into that next good job. I'm asking myself, am I prepared enough? Are we, as education and workforce systems, prepared enough to really respond to the complexity of the work ahead? And, I think the answer is that we can be better prepared. And I'll leave it at, come talk to us at the forum. JFF will have a booth. You're going to see Kelly running around all over the place at the forum. So, as Awake, kind of continues to gain steam here, I think we need more input from the field about, really about how and where, you have expectations and where you're looking to JFF and NAWB, both for leadership and to connect with new tools and new approaches. And we're going to find ways to create systems and channels for folks in the field to stay more connected to one another and hopefully stay more connected to us.
Awesome. I want to thank Josh. I want to thank Eric. I want to thank JFFLabs and JFF for making time for this webinar, for having this conversation around awake technology, the future of work and what to anticipate and expect at NOB. Again, if you're interested in hearing more about JFFLabs and JFF, please go to their website. Also go to NOB's website, nawb.org. Again, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and if you're interested in continuing to connect with any one of us, I know that they'll be providing most likely contact information. So again, thank you this afternoon, and have a great day.